Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today we're going to continue on with our beekeeping conversation and talking about nukes, the advantages and disadvantages, and deciding whether or not you want to use one to start your beekeeping adventures. Let's get started. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about nukes and whether or not you want to use them to go ahead and start your beekeeping adventures, the advantages and disadvantages. Now, when looking at a nuke, it's first important to take a look and see what is a nuke exactly. A nuke is a starter hive that consists of typically 3 or 5 frames, medium or deep. Typically, they are going to be deep frames, though, in a cardboard or plastic box with a top on it and a hole that can be covered up so that way the bees can come and go looking for forage if they need to, whether that's nectar or pollen. And then when the time comes for you to go ahead and install that nuke, that hole can either be covered up with small netting or some type of a breathable material so that way the bees are able to come and go. Now, one way what you can do is go ahead and form a nuke is you're going to take frames from a previous hive. You're going to take some honey, you're going to take some capped brood, and you're going to put them together with an actively laying queen. Or you can go ahead and stick 1 or 2 frames in an area with an actively laying queen and have them go ahead and expand those frames out. So that way it is a small starter hive. So now that we know what a nuke is, it's time to go ahead and take a look at what are some of the advantages that you would have in dealing with a nuke. When working with a nuke, the first thing that you can take a look at is that you actually know the genetics of that species, whether they are Italians or Carniolans. Typically speaking, you will know the history of that. Also, typically, it's going to be of strong stock that has already survived the winter in your area, so that way it will help. There are possibilities of sending a nuke through the winter or sending a nuke through the male, so that way it could be an area from a geographic region that's not typically from your area, but typically speaking, it's going to be from a local area because it is a little bit more expensive to ship a nuke. However, it is possible to do. Also, when dealing with a nuke, it is something that's going to be self-contained in a small little package, so that way it is a lot easier to transport. Similar to a package, you can go ahead and put it in a small box and move it around. It's going to be significantly less in weight than it will be in a fully sized hive with your 10 frame super bottom board top board. So that is another thing that is very amazing about it is significantly going. Another thing that can be advantageous about dealing with the nuke is the fact that it is going to be a little bit further along, so it is a little bit easier for starter beekeepers to work with because you already have a small established hive. You already know that it is a laying queen, and so there's going to be less potential for error and easier for a beginner beekeeper to get going. Now, that's not always said that that is guaranteed for it, but it is going to help with that beginning process. Now, the other major advantage to take a look at when dealing with this hive is to know that the queen has already accepted into the colony. Sometimes when you're dealing with packages, it's not always guaranteed that the queen is going to be accepted, and there is a potential that the queen could be killed. Now, this is not very common. It could potentially be the case, but in very, very rare instances does that actually occur. So that is the other major final thing to take a look at in dealing with these hives, is that the queen is already actively laying and she has been accepted. One thing to take a look at when you're dealing with a nuke of bees is that sometimes it can be a little bit more expensive. Typically, package or a swarm is going to be your cheapest option when dealing with these, when starting a new hive. However, occasionally speaking, the nuke is not going to be the cheapest option, but it's also not going to be the more expensive. It's typically a middle of the road. In my area right now, an average nuke goes for about $190. So is it a little bit more expensive than you'll commonly find? Probably, but I live in a little bit more isolated area and you can tend to get a little bit more for it. Typically speaking, though, in the U.S. now, as of the spring 2020, you can expect to find a Nuc of Bees in the $170 to the $190 range. One other thing to be concerned about when taking a look at whether or not you want to start a nuke or not is sometimes when you are repositioning a nuke and dealing with it, the hive can be a little bit more aggressive. When dealing with a package or a swarm, the bees don't already have a home that they have decided that they want to go ahead and take a look at doing, and so they are, typically speaking, going to be a little bit more aggressive because they have an established home and want to go ahead and defend it. Whereas a package or a nuke, they don't tend to be as aggressive when you are reestablishing the hive because they aren't having that established home, and so they're not as willing to defend it. One final disadvantage that I can think of in dealing with nukes is that there typically is going to be a higher mite population. When you're dealing with a swarm or when you're dealing with a package, there is going to be a major break in the mite population because the queen is going to stop laying her eggs, which means there's going to be a significant drop in the mite population because she's not actively laying, and so the mites won't have a continuous growth rate. However, when the queen is able to continue laying like she is in the nuke, then there is the potential to have a higher mite population starting off. So that is one thing to keep in mind, is that you may have to treat a little bit sooner because you are going to have a higher mite population. That being said, one advantage that I can think of that I did forget to mention is that because you're starting out with a nuke, the queen and the hive as a whole is going to be significantly further along in its production, and so there is going to be a much higher population growth, and it is possible that you could get honey production off of your first year hive, whereas typically speaking you're not going to expect any off of your first year when it is a package or a swarm because the hive is so young and small. So that is one advantage that I did forget. So let me know, did I forget anything? Advantages, disadvantages? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below, because there are some other things that are very possible that I didn't think about. But those are advantages and disadvantages that are with the nuke overall. Now that we've talked about the advantages and disadvantages of the hive, let's go ahead and talk about how do you go about installing a nuke. One thing that you'll want is to go ahead and have your bottom super, your deep super frames, or whatever size of super your nuke is already established. You're going to take the nuke, or the frames that are in that nuke, and place them in the very center in the exact same order that they are in the nuke into the new hive. And then you're going to go ahead and place frames on either side of those until you fill out that bottom super. Go ahead and put the inner cover, top cover on, and let it go. It's as simple as that. Once again, you'll want to make certain to use your smoker so you can help keep the bees calm, but the queen is actively running about in the frames, so you'll want to be certain not to potentially squish her, because that is a little bit more potential with a nuke with her actively running around, whereas the queen in the package, you know exactly where she's at in the little cage, so it's a little bit easier to keep track of her. Now, one other thing that I think is really important to think about, what a lot of people typically don't think may or may not be important, is feeding your bees. Typically speaking, when people install a package or a swarm, they are thinking, hey, you know what? I've got a brand new package. I've got a brand new swarm. There are no reserves of honey whatsoever. So let's feed. Let's get our pollen patties. Let's get our liquid sugar on there. And let's go ahead and make certain that we actually feed them. When you are dealing with a nuke, I've noticed sometimes take a look at that and go, you know what? It's kind of an established hive already. We don't need a feed. Well, I find that not to be the case. One thing that is absolutely important that you will want to do is make certain to feed your bees. Even though it's a nuke, get your sugar liquid in there, get your pollen patties. You need to feed them, especially if you are installing in the middle of high spring or low summer where there could potentially be a dearth. So just because it's an established hive, make certain you feed them. That is the number one mistake that I see people make when they first installing a nuke, is they don't also supplemental feed them if that is a necessity in your area. So keep that in mind. So those are the advantages and disadvantages of installing a nuke. The question is this something that you want to do? Does the advantages outweigh the disadvantages? Go ahead and let us know in the comments below. What's your thoughts? Does the cost a little bit more, but the advantages of it being a more established hive outweigh those disadvantages? It all depends on what it comes down to you. Go ahead and let us know in the comments. And if you liked the video, go ahead and click on the subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell so you can get new notifications with us for new videos that we post. So once again, Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you next time.